For 20 years, a town kept a secret. Not because they didn't know, but because they chose silence. A veteran Navy SEAL returned to accept an inheritance from the woman who raised him. But the forest had been waiting. Beneath a dying house, under water and wood, a truth had been sealed away by one decision, made in fear. But his dog stopped, refusing to move, as if it could feel something still waiting in the dark. The deeper they went, the clearer it became. Someone had protected that silence for far too long. And what they uncovered wasn't just the past. It was a mistake that never truly ended. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, like and subscribe to Veteran Dog Stories for more stories that stay with you. He always left before the light could catch him. That was Ethan Calder's rule, though he had never spoken it out loud. At 43, with shoulders built by years of disciplined force and a body still carrying the quiet strength of a Navy SEAL, Ethan moved through towns the way shadows slide along walls. Present, useful, but never staying long enough to belong. He stood about 6'1", broad across the chest, his posture naturally upright, as if he were still waiting for orders that would never come. His face was sharply cut, the jawline defined, with a short, rough stubble that never quite turned into a full beard. His eyes, steel blue with a gray undertone, didn't wander. They measured, always measuring. His hair was kept short, military neat, dark brown with early streaks of silver at the temples, as though time had brushed him there first. He wore the same thing every day. An olive field jacket faded just enough to show it had seen weather, not fashion. Underneath, a red and deep blue plaid shirt, the top button always undone. Dark cargo pants with worn seams, brown leather boots, scuffed, shaped by long miles. And on his wrist, an old military watch, scratched but still precise. He didn't talk much. When he did, it was simple. Direct, no extra weight. People didn't ask questions after that, because something in his presence made it clear he had already answered too many. Ronin walked beside him like a second heartbeat. The German Shepherd was 5 years old, a working line K9 with a black and tan coat that carried a subtle sheen under daylight. His body was balanced and efficient. No wasted movement, no softness. Every step deliberate. His ears stayed alert, catching sounds long before they reached human awareness. But it was his eyes that unsettled people. Deep amber, focused, thinking. Ronin didn't just follow Ethan. He watched him, not in obedience, something closer to understanding. They had been in the town for less than 48 hours, a place so small it barely held a name, tucked near the edge of a northern forest where tall pines filtered the sunlight into soft gold beams. The air smelled of sap and old wood. There was one main road, a gas station, a diner with peeling paint, and houses that leaned slightly from years of winter. Ethan had taken a temporary job fixing a fence behind the diner. Cash, no questions. 2 days at most, that was enough. It was always enough. He woke before dawn. He always did. Not because he wanted to, because something inside him never truly slept. For a moment, he lay still in the back of his old truck, listening. The silence wasn't empty. It never was. It carried layers. Wind brushing branches, a distant metal creak, the faint shift of something small moving in the grass. He reached instinctively toward the passenger's side. Ronin was already awake. But this time, something was different. The dog wasn't looking at him. Ronin stood outside the truck, still as a statue, body angled toward the road that disappeared into the trees. His ears were forward, his posture rigid, not tense, not alarmed, but focused. Ethan pushed himself up slowly, every movement quiet. "What is it?" he murmured. Ronin didn't move, didn't look back, just stared. Ethan stepped out, boots pressing softly into the dirt. The early light hadn't broken yet, but the horizon held that pale edge of morning waiting to rise. He followed the direction of Ronin's gaze. The road was narrow, unpaved. It curved gently into the forest, where sunlight would later spill through tall pines and illuminate everything in soft gold. Right now, it looked like nothing. Just another path. Just another direction to leave. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Not today," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than the dog. He turned, walked back toward the truck. Routine. Pack up, leave before the town wakes, don't look back. But Ronin didn't follow. Ethan stopped, closed his eyes briefly. That had never happened before. When Ethan turned back again, Ronin had taken exactly 3 steps forward onto the road, no more. Then he stopped, sat, and waited. Not for a command, for a decision. Ethan stared at the dog. For a long second, neither of them moved. There had been moments like this before. In other places, other missions. Times when Ronin had sensed something hidden, something wrong, something waiting. Ronin had never been wrong. Not once. Ethan swallowed, the motion slow, deliberate. "This isn't that," he said quietly. But even as the words left his mouth, they felt thinner than they should. Because there was no threat here, no danger, no enemy, just a road. And yet, Ronin waited like it mattered. Ethan turned back toward the truck again. He placed one hand on the door, fingers resting on the handle. He could leave. He always left. Before anything could settle. Before anything could hold him in place. Before memory had time to grow roots. A flicker of something surfaced, uninvited. A memory. His grandmother. A small kitchen, sunlight through a window, the smell of dried leaves and something bitter steeping in hot water. Her voice soft, patient, calling out names of plants as if they were people she knew personally. "Pay attention," she had said once, placing a crushed leaf in his palm. "The world tells you things, if you don't rush past it." Ethan had been 10. He hadn't understood. Not then. He opened his eyes, looked at Ronin again. The dog hadn't moved. "Damn it," Ethan muttered under his breath. Not frustration, something closer to surrender. He stepped away from the truck. The road into the forest was quiet. Not empty, never empty, but calm in a way that didn't demand anything. The trees stood tall, their trunks straight and patient, branches high enough to let light pass through in soft layers. As the sun finally began to rise, it spilled into the forest in slow gold streams. Ethan walked without urgency. Ronin moved beside him again now, relaxed, but still attentive. The building appeared gradually, first as a shape between trees, then as structure. It sat slightly off the road, where the forest opened just enough to allow a small clearing. A 2-story structure, stone at the base, wood above. The paint had long since faded to a soft gray, worn by weather and time. The roof sloped gently, metal dulled but intact. The front porch was narrow, supported by wooden posts that still held firm. And above the door, a sign, faded, nearly unreadable, but still there. "For sale, county property, $1. Ethan stopped a few feet away. He didn't step closer immediately, didn't reach for the door, just looked. It wasn't abandoned, not in the way most places were. There was no sense of decay that came from being left behind. Instead, it felt paused, like someone had stepped away mid-thought. Ronin moved ahead of him, slowly. He walked up the porch, stopped at the door, lowered his head slightly, nose near the wood, then looked back. Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Not sharp, not painful, just movement. He stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked under his weight, solid, not rotting. His hand hovered near the door handle. He hesitated, not out of fear, out of something unfamiliar. For years, every instinct he had trained was built on forward motion, move, adapt, leave, survive. But standing there, in front of a place that had no reason to matter, he felt something else. Stillness. Ethan exhaled slowly. His hand closed around the handle. He didn't open the door. Not yet. Instead, he leaned his forehead lightly against the wood, eyes closed. Just for a second. Behind him, the forest breathed. Ahead of him, the door waited. And for the first time in years, Ethan Calder didn't think about where he would go next. Ethan didn't open the door that morning. He stood there long enough for the sunlight to climb higher, warming the porch boards beneath his boots, then stepped back. Not retreating, just pausing. There was a difference. He knew that much. Ronin lingered near the threshold, head slightly lowered, nose tracing the air as if memorizing it. The dog didn't push forward, didn't scratch at the door. He simply stayed within a quiet boundary, as though he understood that some places required permission, not force. Ethan turned away first. They walked back down the narrow road toward town, neither of them rushing. For once, he wasn't calculating his exit. He wasn't thinking about gas, distance, or the next place to disappear into. He was thinking about a door he hadn't opened. The county office sat near the edge of town, a low brick building that looked like it had been built to last longer than the people working inside it. The windows were clean, the sign straight, the kind of place where nothing dramatic ever happened. But everything important quietly passed through. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and old wood. Behind the counter stood a woman in her early 60s, Margaret Doyle. She had short silver hair cut close to the head, practical and neat, and a narrow face softened by time rather than age. Her eyes were pale blue, steady, the kind that missed very little. She wore a simple knit cardigan over a collared shirt, sleeves rolled halfway up, as if she had long ago decided comfort mattered more than formality. Margaret looked up when the door opened. Her gaze moved first to Ethan, taking in the posture, the stillness, the way he stood without leaning on anything. Then to Ronin, who stepped in beside him without hesitation, but with quiet discipline. She didn't smile right away. "Morning," she said, voice even. Ethan gave a small nod. "Morning." Margaret's eyes dropped briefly to the old watch on his wrist, then back up again. "You're not from here." It wasn't a question. "No." She studied him for a moment longer, not suspicious, just measuring. Then she gestured toward a stack of folders on the counter. "What can I do for you?" Ethan hesitated, just slightly. It was the kind of hesitation most people wouldn't notice. But Margaret did. "The property out on Hollow Road," he said finally. "The one by the woods." Margaret didn't reach for the folder immediately. Instead, she leaned back a fraction, arms resting lightly against the counter. "That place doesn't get many visitors." "I saw the sign." That sign's been there a long time. Ethan didn't respond. Margaret turned then, pulling a thin file from a cabinet behind her. She opened it slowly, as if the contents required a certain pace. North Hollow Field Dispensary, she said, almost to herself. Built sometime in the early 1900s. Closed down in the late 60s. Owner passed. No next of kin willing to keep it. She flipped a page. County took it over after unpaid taxes. Been sitting ever since. Her eyes moved up again. You interested? Ethan glanced toward the window, where sunlight had started to settle across the pavement outside. Maybe. Margaret's mouth curved, not quite a smile. That's usually how it starts. She laid out the details plainly. No electricity connected. Lines would need replacing. Roof intact, but aging. Water access uncertain. Old well probably needs inspection. Structures sound enough, but repairs wouldn't be cheap. Most people hear that, she said, tapping the file lightly, and they lose interest. Ethan's gaze stayed steady. Margaret continued. We've had 3 serious inquiries over the years. She held up a finger. First one wanted to tear it down. Said the land was better than the building. Another finger. Second wanted to turn it into some kind of vacation rental. Gave up when he realized no one wants to drive 30 minutes into the woods without signal. A third. Last one lasted about a week. Started cleaning. Left in the middle of the night. Never came back for his tools. Ethan's brow tightened just slightly. Why? Margaret shrugged. Didn't say. Silence settled between them for a moment. Then she added, more quietly, some places don't like being changed too quickly. Ethan didn't laugh, didn't dismiss it. He just stood there, considering. Ronin, meanwhile, had moved a few steps into the office. He lowered his head, sniffing lightly along the floor, then stopped, perfectly still, for a brief second before lifting his gaze back to Ethan. No tension, just awareness. Margaret noticed. That dog yours? Yeah. He's trained. Yes. She nodded once. Military? Ethan met her eyes. Something like that. Margaret didn't press further. People in towns like this learned early. Some stories weren't meant for questions. She closed the file halfway, resting her hand over it. It's $1, she said simply. Ethan almost frowned. That's it? That's it. There's got to be something else. There is, Margaret replied. She tapped the file again. Responsibility, maintenance, liability. The understanding that once you take it, it's yours. No undoing it because it gets inconvenient. Her eyes sharpened slightly. And the understanding that you're not buying a business. Ethan waited. You're buying a place that stopped being useful to the world a long time ago. Ronin stepped forward suddenly. Not fast, not aggressive, just deliberate. He walked up to the counter and stopped directly in front of Margaret. Then he sat. Perfect posture, eyes level with hers, and for a brief moment, Margaret didn't look at Ethan. She looked at the dog. Her expression shifted. Not fear, not surprise. Recognition. She reached down slowly, stopping just short of touching him. He's not here by accident, she said quietly. It wasn't directed at Ethan. It was a statement. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Not warning, not danger. Something older. Margaret straightened again, clearing her throat as if resetting herself. Well, she said, voice returning to its usual tone. That's the situation. She slid the file fully across the counter. You want it? It's yours. Ethan didn't pick it up right away. He looked down at the papers, then back at the woman. "Why haven't you sold it already?" Margaret held his gaze. "We've tried." "That's not what I asked." A faint pause, then she answered honestly. "Because most people who come in here don't see it." Ethan's jaw shifted slightly. "And you think I do?" Margaret tilted her head. "I think you're not looking at it like it's a problem to fix." Another beat. "You're looking at it like it's unfinished." Ethan didn't respond, because she wasn't wrong. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a worn bill, set it on the counter. $1. The simplest transaction he'd made in years. Margaret didn't take it immediately. Instead, she opened a drawer beneath the counter and removed a small key attached to a faded green ribbon. The metal was old, solid, heavy in a way that newer things weren't. She placed it beside the bill. "Last key made for that door," she said. Ethan picked it up. It felt familiar. Not because he'd held it before, but because it fit in his hand the way something meant to be used always does. "Name?" Margaret asked, already reaching for a form. "Ethan Calder." She wrote it down in careful, deliberate script. "Occupation?" Ethan paused. Then, "Nothing permanent." Margaret nodded like she understood more than he'd said. She stamped the paper, signed it, then slid it back across the counter. "That's it," she said. Ethan looked at the document, then at her. "That's it?" Margaret gave a small, almost amused breath. "Sometimes things are simpler than we expect." Then softer. "Doesn't mean they're easier." Ethan turned toward the door. Ronin moved with him immediately. But before they stepped outside, Margaret spoke again. "Mr. Calder." He stopped. Didn't turn fully, just enough. "If you decide to leave," she said, "don't do it in a hurry." A pause. "That place has been waiting a long time." Outside, the light had fully settled over the town. Everything looked the same as it had the day before. But something had shifted. Ethan didn't head back to the truck right away. Instead, he stood there for a moment, the key resting in his palm, feeling its weight. Ronin stood beside him, quiet, present. Ethan exhaled slowly. Then, without saying a word, he turned back toward the road leading into the forest. Ethan didn't rush the second time he entered the building. The key turned with a low, clean click, too smooth for something that had supposedly been unused for decades. He paused at the threshold again, not out of hesitation this time, but habit. The kind of habit that came from walking into places that could turn against you without warning. He stepped inside. The air hadn't changed. It still carried that dry, layered scent. Old wood, dust, faint traces of alcohol from long evaporated tinctures, and something else beneath it. Something organic. Not rot. Not decay. Just age. Ronin moved ahead of him, slower than usual. The dog's body stayed loose, but his attention had sharpened. His ears flicked at small sounds, settling beams, shifting air. But his focus drifted back again and again toward the same wall. The cabinet. Ethan set his pack down near the counter and rolled his shoulders once, loosening stiffness from the drive and the years that never really left his joints. "All right," he muttered. "Let's see what we actually bought." He started with the obvious. Windows, intact, though layered with dust. Hinges rusted, but workable. Floorboards solid under weight, no hollow give. The roof would need inspection, but nothing immediately concerning. He moved methodically, always methodical. Check structure, check exits, check anything that could fail. It was how he had stayed alive. Ronin didn't follow the inspection pattern. He drifted. back and forth between open floor space and the cabinet wall. Nose low, occasionally pausing at spots only he seemed to register. His tail stayed neutral, not alert, not relaxed, just attentive. Ethan noticed. Of course he did. But he didn't act on it. Not yet. He approached the cabinet at last. Up close, it was even more impressive than it had appeared from the doorway. Hand-built oak, darkened with age, the grain still visible beneath layers of time and use. The drawers were arranged in a near-perfect grid, each one fitted with a small brass pull and a label. Handwritten, precise, almost elegant. Latin names. Ethan recognized a few. Not because of formal training, because of her. His grandmother had never used Latin. She had used stories. Yarrow, she would say, holding a cluster of pale flowers. For blood that won't listen. Chamomile, she'd smile, pressing dried petals into his palm. For people who can't quiet their thoughts. Ethan had been 10, maybe younger. He hadn't realized then that she was teaching him something that would follow him into places where nothing else did. He opened one of the drawers. Inside, a small bundle of dried plant matter, crumbled at the edges, but still recognizable in shape. He lifted it slightly, careful not to break it further. The scent was faint, but real. He closed the drawer again. Behind him, Ronin shifted. Ethan glanced back. The dog had moved closer now, closer than before. Not pacing, not searching, positioned. You see something? Ethan asked quietly. Ronin didn't respond. He just stood there. Ethan returned to the cabinet. He opened more drawers this time, one after another. Some were empty. Others held remnants, leaves, roots, bark, all dried beyond practical use. The labels varied in clarity, some faded, some still sharp. He worked his way down, row by row. No rush, just observation. The difference was subtle. So subtle most people would have missed it entirely. Ethan didn't. The bottom row, far right. He crouched, opened the drawer. Shallower, not by much, but enough. He slid it out completely this time, setting it carefully on the floor beside him. Then he leaned forward, eyes narrowing slightly. The back panel behind the drawer didn't match the rest. The wood was newer, or maybe just different. Ethan exhaled slowly. All right, he murmured. Before he could reach in, Ronin stepped forward, fast but controlled. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He simply moved between Ethan and the cabinet, placing himself there for a brief second, just long enough to make contact. Then he turned his head slightly and stepped aside. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't fear. It was acknowledgement. Ethan's jaw tightened just a fraction. Yeah, he said under his breath. I see it. He reached in, his fingers traced along the seam. There, a small wooden peg, angled slightly, nearly invisible unless you knew what to look for. Ethan pressed it sideways. There was resistance at first. Then, a soft release. The panel shifted. Not much. Just enough. Ethan eased it open carefully. The hinge gave a faint, dry sound. Metal against metal that hadn't moved in a long time, but hadn't rusted shut either. He leaned back slightly, giving himself space. Always give yourself space. Inside the hidden compartment, 3 objects rested on a folded cloth that had yellowed with age. They weren't scattered. They weren't abandoned. They had been placed. Ethan didn't touch them immediately. He just looked. A leather-bound book, worn but intact. The surface darkened with use, edges softened, corners slightly curled. It wasn't decorative. It was functional. a pouch. Soft fabric cinched at the top. Its weight was obvious, even without lifting it. And a letter. Cream-colored paper, folded neatly, sealed with a darkened wax stamp that had cracked slightly over time but still held. Ethan sat back. Not because he was overwhelmed, because something inside him had gone quiet. This wasn't luck. It didn't feel like discovery. It felt like interruption, as if he had stepped into something that had been continuing without him. And now he was part of it, whether he understood it or not. Ronin lowered himself slowly beside him. The dog's posture had changed. No longer alert, no longer searching. Just present. Ethan reached for the pouch first. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then lifted it. He didn't open it. Not yet. The weight was enough to tell him it mattered. Next, the book. He ran his thumb along the edge of the pages. Rough, hand-cut, used. This wasn't something you wrote once and set aside. This was something you built over time. Finally, his eyes moved to the letter. He didn't pick it up. Not yet. Instead, Ethan leaned back against the cabinet, resting his forearms on his knees. He looked at the three objects again, then at the open compartment, then at Ronin. "You ever get the feeling," he said quietly, "that you walked into the middle of something, instead of finding it?" Ronin didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. Ethan nodded once, almost to himself. He reached forward again. Slowly, carefully, he gathered all three items and placed them on the counter behind him. Not opening them, not yet. Some things weren't meant to be rushed. The room felt different now. Not heavier, not lighter, just aware. Ethan stood, stretching out his back slightly. His eyes moved across the cabinet again. But now, every drawer looked different. Not just containers. Pieces of something unfinished. He glanced at the door, still closed, still quiet. Then back at the counter, at the book, the pouch, the letter. Ethan Calder had spent years walking away from things before they could become real, before they could mean anything, before they could matter. This time, he didn't. He pulled a chair closer to the counter, sat down, hands resting lightly on the surface, not reaching, not opening, just staying. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the need to leave. Ethan didn't touch the letter for a long time. The light had shifted by the time he finally reached for it, morning drifting into something softer, warmer. The kind of daylight that made dust visible as it moved slowly through the air. It settled across the counter, over the leather-bound book, over the small pouch, over the envelope sealed in wax. Everything in that room felt like it had been waiting, not for anyone, for someone. Ethan's fingers hovered just above the paper before making contact. The envelope was thicker than it looked. Not modern, no gloss, no uniform edges. It had weight to it, like it had been made to last longer than the hands that wrote it. He turned it over. No name, no address. Just the faint impression of a seal pressed by hand, cracked slightly at the edges, but still holding. Ronin shifted beside him. Not closer, not away, just enough that Ethan felt it without looking. "All right," Ethan murmured. He broke the seal carefully. The sound was soft, but it echoed. Inside was a single folded sheet. He unfolded it slowly, smoothing the creases with his palm. The handwriting was steady, clean, deliberate, not rushed, not decorative. Someone who had taken the time to write things exactly as they meant them. Ethan began to read. October 19th, 1968. to the one who opens this drawer. My name is Henry Whitlock. Ethan stopped there, not because he needed to, because the name felt anchored, like it belonged in the room. He continued, I am the last man to keep this place open. Not because I was the best at it, but because I stayed longer than the others. Ethan leaned back slightly in the chair. That line settled deeper than the rest, stayed longer. He kept reading. I was never a doctor, not by paper, not by title. But I watched long enough to learn what helps a man make it through the night. Sometimes it was a root boiled into something bitter. Sometimes it was a hand that didn't leave too soon. Ethan's jaw shifted slightly, a muscle tightening. Not rejection, recognition. The letter continued. This place was never meant to fix what is broken. It was meant to sit beside it. Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. Ronin lowered his head to the floor, resting it between his front paws. His eyes didn't close. They stayed on Ethan. I closed this place because the world changed, not because it failed. There are better medicines now, faster ones, stronger ones. But there are still things they don't reach. Ethan read slower now, not skimming, not searching, listening. If you are reading this, then you have already seen what matters. Not the drawers, not the bottles, the space between them. Ethan's gaze flickered, just briefly, toward the cabinet behind him, then back to the page. The book you found is not complete. It never will be. It is not a record of answers. It is a record of paying attention. Ethan's hand rested on the leather cover of the book without him realizing it. The money is there because starting again costs more than most men are willing to admit. Use it if you must. Or don't. It was never the important part. He paused again. The pouch sat untouched, still closed, still waiting. Then his eyes dropped to the final lines. You will know if this place is meant for you. Not because it welcomes you, but because it doesn't push you away. Ethan's throat tightened slightly. Not emotion he could name. Something closer to pressure. Then, the last sentence. The man who finds this will understand the silence here, because he carries it with him already. Ethan didn't move, didn't breathe. For a brief, almost imperceptible moment, he thought he heard something behind him. Not a sound. A shift, as if the room itself had adjusted. Ronin's head lifted instantly, ears forward, eyes locked. Not on the door, not on the windows, on the cabinet. Ethan didn't turn, not immediately. He had learned long ago that reacting too fast could turn uncertainty into danger. Instead, he listened. Nothing. But the feeling remained. He folded the letter slowly, carefully aligning the edges as they had been before. Not out of respect, out of instinct. Some things were meant to go back the way they were. Ethan set the letter down, then reached for the pouch. The fabric was worn, smooth from years of contact. The drawstring loosened easily under his fingers. He opened it. Metal, coins, not new, not polished, old, some silver, some gold. He didn't count them, didn't need to. The weight told him enough. Not a fortune, but enough to start something, enough to stay. That thought landed heavier than the coins. He closed the pouch again and set it beside the letter, then turned his attention to the book. The leather creaked softly as he opened it. The first page was filled. Not printed. Written. The same handwriting. Henry Whitlock. Dates ran down the margins. Notes filled the spaces between. Some lines crossed out, others rewritten. Nothing clean, nothing final. Ethan flipped a few pages, Each one the same: observation, adjustment, time. No promises, no certainty. He stopped on one entry. Chamomile. Works best when the man believes it will. Does nothing when he does not. Ethan stared at the line, then leaned back in the chair again. "That's not medicine," he muttered. Ronin stood, moved a step closer. Ethan looked at him. "Or maybe it is," he added quietly. The room felt different now, not because of what he had found, because of what he understood. This wasn't a place that had been abandoned. It was a place that had reached the end of one man's time. Ethan closed the book. Not finished, not even close, but enough for now. He stood slowly, joints adjusting, the quiet stiffness of years reminding him where he had been. His eyes moved across the room again. But this time, he wasn't looking at damage, or repairs, or exit points. He was looking at possibility. Not in the way people usually meant it. Not opportunity, not profit. Something simpler. A place where leaving wasn't the first answer. Ethan picked up the letter again, held it for a moment, then set it back down exactly where it had been. He didn't return it to the compartment. Not yet. Ronin moved back toward the cabinet, settling down in front of it again. Same position as before, same stillness. Ethan watched him for a second, then nodded slightly. "Yeah," he said under his breath. He walked to the door, opened it. Light spilled in. For a moment he stood there, not stepping out, not stepping away, just standing. Then he turned back inside. The door remained open behind him, and for the first time, Ethan Calder didn't feel like he had walked into something by accident. He felt like he had been expected. Ethan didn't decide to stay. There was no moment where he stood in the doorway and made a promise to himself. No plan written down, no quiet resolution spoken out loud. He simply didn't leave. And for a man who had built his life around leaving before anything could hold him, that was already something unfamiliar. The next morning, he woke in the same place he had fallen asleep, sitting in the chair beside the counter, boots still on, one arm resting near the closed leather book. The light had already begun to slip through the windows, spreading slowly across the floor in long, quiet lines. For a few seconds, he didn't move. His body had expected something else: movement, routine, departure. But none of it came. Instead, he sat there, watching the light settle across the room, while Ronin stretched nearby, lowering his front legs and letting out a slow breath, as if the place itself had allowed him to rest more deeply than anywhere else they had been. Ethan stepped outside not long after, scanning the structure the way he always did, breaking things down into parts that could fail. The roof drew his attention first. Metal panels still in place, but edges lifting where time had worn the fastenings loose. It wasn't urgent, but it wouldn't hold forever either. He found tools in a small shed behind the building, old but cared for, and climbed up without overthinking it. The work came easily. His hands remembered structure even when his mind refused to remember other things. Hammering, tightening, adjusting. It gave him something to do that didn't require him to think about what came next. Ronin stayed below, positioned at the edge of the clearing where he could see both the road and the tree line. He didn't pace or wander. He simply watched, ears shifting occasionally as distant sounds moved through the forest. His posture calm but ready, the way it had always been, that quiet vigilance, the kind that never turned off, was something Ethan understood better than he liked. Inside, the place began to change gradually. Ethan opened the windows, letting air move through the long room, pushing out the stale stillness that had settled over years of disuse. Dust lifted and drifted instead of clinging to every surface. He wiped down the counter, swept the floor, cleared enough space to move without stepping over forgotten remnants. He didn't try to fix everything, just one section at a time, one drawer, one surface, one small piece of something that had been left behind. At night, he read the book, not like a manual, but like a conversation that had been waiting for someone patient enough to listen. The entries weren't instructions. They were observations. Notes about what helped and what didn't, written without certainty, adjusted over time. He found himself slowing down when he read, not because the words were difficult, but because they required something he hadn't practiced in a long time, staying still long enough to understand them. On the third day, someone came. Ethan didn't hear the approach first. Ronin did. The dog shifted near the door, not alarmed, not tense, just aware in a way that signaled presence rather than threat. Ethan looked up from the counter and saw the figure standing just outside, not knocking, not calling out, simply waiting as if unsure whether crossing the threshold would change something. The man was older, somewhere in his 70s, thin in the way of someone who had spent years wearing down rather than weakening all at once. His face was lined deeply, skin pale and weathered, with blue eyes that still held clarity despite everything they had likely seen. His gray hair was uneven, as if cut without much concern, and a short, rough beard covered his jaw. He wore a brown canvas jacket that had clearly been used for decades, layered over a flannel shirt softened by time, with worn jeans and boots that had been maintained out of necessity rather than care for appearance. There was nothing fragile about him, but there was something quiet in the way he stood, like someone who had stopped expecting things to improve. Ethan straightened slightly and stepped closer to the door. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice even, without urgency. The man didn't answer right away. His eyes moved past Ethan, taking in the room, the cabinet, the space as a whole, as if measuring whether it was still the same place he remembered. Then he looked back at Ethan and said, "Heard someone bought this." Ethan nodded once. "Yeah." "That you?" "Yeah." The man shifted his weight slightly, then asked, "You open?" Ethan almost said no. The word sat there, ready, familiar, easy. But something in the man's expression stopped him. Not expectation, not demand, just exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep. "I'm here," Ethan said instead. That seemed to be enough. The man stepped inside slowly, and Ronin moved then, not to block him, not to greet him, but to position himself near Ethan, angled just enough to observe both of them at once. The older man noticed immediately, his gaze dropping to the dog before lifting again. "That one's seen things," he said quietly. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. The man moved closer to the counter, resting his hands on the edge, rough fingers pressing lightly against the wood. "I used to come here," he said after a moment. "Long time ago." Ethan felt his attention sharpen. "When it was still open?" The man nodded. "Yeah. Guy who ran it. Didn't say much." A faint breath escaped him, something close to memory. But he didn't leave either. There was a long pause after that, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Finally, the man spoke again, quieter this time. "I don't sleep much anymore." No explanation followed. Ethan didn't ask for one. "I'm not a doctor," he said. "I don't handle anything serious." The man shrugged faintly. "Didn't come for serious." That settled it. Ethan turned toward the cabinet, pulling open one of the drawers without hesitation. He didn't overthink the choice. Chamomile, simple, familiar. He measured a small amount and moved to the back where a kettle sat, rigged to a portable heat source he had managed to get working. The water took time to warm, and in that time, nothing needed to be said. Ronin shifted again, this time moving closer to the man, not touching him, but close enough that contact would be easy. After a moment, the man reached down and placed a hand on the dog's back, his touch careful but steady. Ronin didn't react. He simply remained there, allowing it. The kettle gave a soft whistle. Ethan poured the water, letting the leaves steep just long enough before handing the cup over. "That's it," he said. "No guarantees." The man nodded. "Didn't come for guarantees." He sat after a moment, holding the cup with both hands, as if the warmth mattered more than the drink itself. Ethan returned to his quiet work, moving around the space without interrupting the silence that had settled between them. Time passed without being measured. When the man finally stood, he set the empty cup down carefully. "Name's Jonah," he said. "Ethan." Jonah nodded once, glancing around the room again, taking it in with a different expression this time. Not just memory, but something closer to acceptance. "I'll come back," he said. Ethan didn't ask when. "All right." Jonah left without another word, the door closing softly behind him. Ethan stood there for a moment, looking at the cup on the counter, then at Ronin, who had already settled back near the cabinet. Nothing about the place had changed. The walls were the same. The air was the same. But something had shifted, subtle but undeniable. Someone had walked in, and he hadn't sent them away. The change didn't come all at once. It never did. It started quietly, the way most things did in that town, through looks that lasted a little too long, conversations that stopped when Ethan walked in, the subtle shift of people measuring something they didn't quite understand. Word had spread, though no one could say exactly how. A man had taken over the old place by the woods. A former soldier, someone said. Lives alone, works with herbs, has a dog that doesn't act like a dog. It didn't sound dangerous, but it didn't sound normal either. Ethan noticed it the next time he drove into town for supplies. The clerk at the hardware store, a stocky man in his late 50s named Carl Bennett, watched him longer than necessary before ringing up the nails and sealant. Carl had a thick neck, a face permanently flushed from years of working under sun and stress, and a mustache that had gone mostly gray. He wasn't unkind, just cautious in the way men became after too many years dealing with people who brought trouble. "You're the one out at Hollow Road," Carl said, more statement than question. Ethan nodded once. "That's right." Carl wiped his hands on a rag, eyes narrowing slightly. "Heard you're helping folks." Ethan didn't react immediately. "Not really." Carl gave a short breath through his nose, not quite a laugh. "Town's small. Things get said whether they're true or not." He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Just don't go making promises you can't keep. People out here, some of them don't have much left to hold on to." Ethan met his gaze, steady and calm. "I don't make promises." Carl studied him for another second, then nodded, satisfied enough. "Good." That was the end of it. But it wasn't. By the time Ethan got back to the dispensary, the quiet felt different, not hostile, just aware. Ronin noticed it too. The dog didn't change position or posture, but his attention lingered longer on the tree line, his ears tracking sounds that hadn't mattered before. It wasn't danger. It was the presence of something shifting. Ethan didn't need it explained. He'd lived through enough to recognize the pattern. People were watching now. Jonah returned the next day. Same jacket, same careful steps, same silence. But this time, he didn't stop at the door. He came in like someone who had already decided. Ethan was at the counter sorting through a small bundle of dried leaves when Jonah spoke. "Didn't sleep," he said. No greeting, no build-up. Ethan nodded once. "Sit down." Jonah did. Ronin moved closer again, settling near Jonah's boots, his presence steady and grounding. Ethan prepared the same tea as before. No adjustments, no attempt to fix the result. Jonah drank it slower this time. After a while, he spoke again. "Used to be a guy here," he said, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the room. "Didn't ask questions. Didn't need answers." Ethan didn't interrupt. Jonah's voice lowered slightly. He knew when to just leave things alone. There was a long pause. Then quietly, "You do that too." Ethan didn't respond. Because he wasn't sure if that was true. Not everyone was as open as Jonah. By the end of the week, 2 more people had come by. One curious, one skeptical. The curious one was a woman in her early 40s named Laura Pike. She was tall, thin, with light brown hair pulled back tightly, as if she had no time for anything that got in the way. Her face was sharp, her movements efficient. She worked at the post office, she said, though she didn't offer it as conversation, more as context. "You the one making tea for people now?" she asked, arms crossed. Ethan didn't react. "I make tea." She studied him carefully, eyes flicking briefly to Ronin, who remained still but attentive. "That all?" "That's all." Laura let out a small breath, not quite convinced. "People start thinking you can do more than that. It gets complicated." "I tell them not to," Ethan said. She held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once. "Good." She didn't stay long, but she left slower than she had arrived. The skeptical one was different. A man named Daniel Voss, mid-40s, broad-shouldered but carrying more weight than strength, with a thick beard and a voice that carried too easily. He had the look of someone who had spent years building things, houses, fences, arguments, and had learned to trust only what he could hold in his hands. "This place is still county land, right?" he asked, glancing around without much respect. "Not anymore," Ethan said calmly. Voss gave a short laugh. "For $1, yeah? Must be something wrong with it." Ethan didn't answer. Voss stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "You planning to turn this into some kind of business?" "No." "Then what are you doing here?" Ethan met his gaze. "Staying." That answer didn't satisfy him, but it ended the conversation. The real pressure didn't come from them. It came at night. Ethan still woke before dawn. Still heard things that weren't there. The echo of movement. The distant crack of something that only existed in memory. The kind of silence that wasn't quiet. It was waiting. He had learned long ago not to react. But that didn't mean it stopped. One night, it was louder than usual. Not a sound. A feeling. The kind that pulled him out of sleep instantly. Every muscle awake before his mind caught up, Ethan sat up in the dark, breath steady, eyes scanning the room. Nothing. The door was closed. The window still. The air unchanged. But something inside him had already decided. Move. He stood, reaching for his pack without thinking. Same motion, same rhythm. Years of repetition. He packed quickly, efficiently. No hesitation. This was what he did. Before things got complicated. Before they mattered. Ronin didn't move. Ethan paused, one strap in his hand. The dog sat in the middle of the room, exactly where he had been before, watching. Not confused, not concerned, just there. "Come on," Ethan said quietly. Ronin didn't respond. Ethan adjusted the strap, turning toward the door. This was the part that always happened next. Step outside. Don't look back. He reached for the handle, opened it. Cool night air slipped in. Behind him? Nothing. No movement. No sound. He stepped forward and stopped. Something was wrong. Not outside. Inside. He turned. Ronin hadn't moved. Still sitting, still watching. No command. No refusal. Just not following. Ethan stood there for a long time. Longer than he should have. Long enough for something to shift. He looked at the dog. Really looked. At the stillness. The certainty. The absence of urgency. Then, slowly, he stepped back inside. The door remained open for a second. Then he closed it. The latch clicked. Soft, final. Ethan stood there, pack still on his shoulder. Then, with a single motion, he took it off. Set it down. Nothing dramatic happened. No realization, no clarity. Just quiet. But this time, he didn't pick it back up. Years passed the way they do in quiet places, without announcement, without ceremony, marked not by events, but by small, steady changes that only became visible when someone stopped long enough to notice them. The dispensary never became what most people would call finished. Some drawers remained empty, their labels faded beyond recognition, holding nothing but air and memory. Others were refilled slowly, not with precision, but with care. Bundles of herbs gathered by hand, dried in the back room, placed where they seemed to belong, rather than where they were expected to be. The book on the counter grew thicker with use. New notes added in a different hand, less elegant than Henry Whitlock's, but steady in its own way. Ethan Calder didn't turn into a healer, not in the way people might have imagined. He never claimed knowledge he didn't have, never offered answers to things that required more than time, patience, and something he couldn't define. If someone came in with something serious, something beyond what he understood, he would tell them plainly, "You should go to the hospital." He said it without hesitation, without fear of losing their trust. And strangely, that honesty made them stay. Not all of them, but enough. The town changed too. Not dramatically, just enough. Carl Bennett still ran the hardware store. Though his hair had gone almost entirely gray now, his movements slower but no less deliberate. He stopped asking questions after the first year. Instead, he would simply nod when Ethan walked in, sometimes adding, "You still out there?" as if confirming something he had already accepted. Laura Pike remained sharp, observant, her posture as straight as ever, though she no longer stood at the doorway with crossed arms. She came in once every few months, never for herself, always for someone else, a neighbor, a relative, someone who didn't want to make a fuss. She never stayed long, but she didn't leave as quickly as she used to either. Daniel Voss took longer. Men like him always did. He came by less often than the others, never asking for anything, just standing in the doorway or near the shelves, looking at the place as if trying to find what didn't make sense, but the edge in his voice softened over time. The question stopped. The doubt remained, but it lost its weight. That was enough. And then there was Jonah. Jonah Creed aged in the way of men who had already lived most of their battles, quietly, without complaint, carrying the years like something familiar rather than something to resist. His jacket wore thinner at the elbows. His steps slowed just slightly, but his presence remained the same. He still didn't talk much. He didn't need to. He came, he sat, he drank the tea Ethan prepared, and he left. Sometimes he stayed longer, Sometimes he didn't, but he always came back. Ronin grew older. It happened gradually, almost unnoticed at first. His movements remained precise, but the recovery took longer. The stillness lasted deeper into the day. His eyes, still sharp, still aware, held something else now, too. Experience. Not the kind that comes from training, the kind that comes from staying. Each evening, Ronin would take his place near the cabinet. The same position, the same quiet presence. No longer watching for threats. Just there. Like a marker of something that didn't need to be explained. One evening, as the light settled into that soft, amber quiet that came just before night, Ronin didn't move to the cabinet right away. He stood near the doorway instead, looking out toward the trees. Ethan noticed. He always did. "Something out there?" he asked quietly. Ronin didn't react. He just stood there for a moment longer, then turned, not toward the forest, but back toward the room, and walked slowly to his usual place, lowering himself with care, his body easing into the position he had taken so many times before. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't concern. It was a choice. Ethan watched him settle, something in his chest tightening in a way he didn't try to name. He understood. Not fully, but enough. The work never stopped. Not the kind people noticed. The kind that required repetition, observation, patience. Ethan kept reading the book, adding to it when something held true long enough to be written down. He never filled it with certainty, only with things he had seen, things he had tested, things that seemed to help, not always, not perfectly, but enough to matter. He never claimed more than that. And over time, the place became what it had once been. Not a business, not a solution. A place where people came when they didn't need answers, only something that helped them keep going. One afternoon, years after he had first stepped through that door, Ethan sat on the porch. The same porch he had once stood on without knowing whether he would stay. The wood beneath him had been repaired, reinforced where needed, but it still held the same quiet weight of time. The forest stretched out in front of him, sunlight filtering through the tall trees, moving slowly across the ground as the day shifted. Ronin lay beside him, head resting on his paws, breathing steady, eyes half closed but never fully unaware. Ethan leaned back slightly, one arm resting on his knee, the other holding a cup of tea that had long since cooled. He didn't drink it. He didn't need to. His thoughts moved without urgency. They didn't pull him forward anymore, didn't drag him back. They simply existed. He thought about his grandmother, the way she had spoken about plants as if they were people, the way she had never rushed him, never forced him to understand, just showed him. He thought about Henry Whitlock, a man he had never met, who had written words that felt like they had been waiting for him long before he knew he would need them. A man who had stayed until he couldn't anymore. He thought about the people who had passed through this place. Some who stayed longer, some who left quickly, some who came back. And for a moment, he didn't think about where he would go next. The thought didn't even occur to him. Instead, something else settled in its place. A quiet understanding. "There are people who never find their way back," he said softly, more to the air than to anyone listening. Ronin's ears shifted slightly, catching the sound. Ethan's gaze remained fixed on the trees. "But sometimes," he continued, voice low, steady, "there's a place that waits long enough." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They stayed. The light shifted again, moving across the porch, brushing against the edges of the door, the frame, the worn wood that had seen more time than most people ever would. Ethan sat there, Not waiting, not leaving, just there. And for the first time since the war, he didn't feel like he was between places. He was in one. Sometimes, the miracle we ask God for does not arrive as something loud, sudden, or impossible. It comes quietly, in the form of a place that does not turn us away, a moment where we choose not to run, or a person who stays when everyone else has already left. Ethan did not win a battle. He did not change the world. But he found something many people spend their whole lives searching for without ever realizing it. A place that allowed him to stay, and the courage to finally accept it. And maybe that is how God works in our lives too. Not by removing every struggle, but by placing us exactly where we need to be, and waiting patiently until we are ready to see it. If you're watching this and you feel lost, tired, or like you have been moving for too long without a place to rest, maybe this is your reminder. You don't always need to find the perfect path. Sometimes, you just need to stop long enough to recognize the place that has been waiting for you all along. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to share it with someone who might need it. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and what part of this story stayed with you the most. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Veteran Dog Stories. May God bless you, guide your steps, and give you the strength to stay when it matters most.